Best quarter of the year for sales, David. That's not everyone hitting that, so kudos.
Thanks. Yeah, should finish out really well.
Love to hear that. Any major change there, or you think just like people getting more comfortable with some of the adjustments you've been making throughout the year?
I definitely think, level of comfortability in terms of a lot of the changes we've made this year. And then we made some territory changes in Q2 that, sometimes can be disruptive. And now that we're through those territory changes, that's helpful as well.
Amazing. All right, looks like we got a lot of people on here. Let's get started. All right, I want to start with just some quick housekeeping and a kind of icebreaker. So first things first, for people you can see, there's a button at the top right for get a demo. We're gonna, this isn't really supposed to be a commercial for Champify or Salesloft, right? We're really trying to talk about tips and tactics here, but I think there's a lot of people that have heard of Champify and still maybe don't know what we do. If you want to learn more, love to have that. I'd also, for people that see in the chat, I'd love to get two things for people to get engaged here in the chat. First thing, I just got out of a heated debate with my wife on whether it's appropriate for us to dress up our dog for a Halloween costume. So I'd love to know if you think that's okay or not okay. I'm on team no, but I think team yes is happening. And then I'd also like to see, if you don't mind putting in the chat, your role and also the size of your sales organization. David is VP of Sales and Biz Dev at 1,000-person organization and growing quickly. We're a seed stage company, still sub 25 people. So we want to make sure this is as relevant as possible for everyone. So if you could take a minute and just say your role and size of your sales org, I think that would help David point some of his guidance and direction accordingly. All right, for those of you I don't know, my name's Todd Busler. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Champify. I ran sales at a company called Heap in the product analytics space. I was there from 0 to 40 million, about 50 plus reps for 6 years. And then I started Champify about 2.5 years ago. We work with 60 of the most innovative B2B go-to-market teams on all things top of funnel pipeline related. The goal of this session is essentially, I had a conversation with the COO at an $8 billion company, and he told me there's only 3 people in the entire organization that could say yes and actually sign off for a Champify purchase, even if it was a starting price point of $50,000 or $75,000. So I think what that means, and I think what a lot of us are feeling and why there's a lot of people here, is we know that getting to execs is critically important, right? Everyone's been told that, get to power, have a more compelling executive message. But there's not a lot of attention or guidance on how to do that, especially at scale. So before we hop into it, I think one thing I wanted to share was just quickly, what is Champify, right? So I don't want this to be a plug, but a lot of you, I think, have heard of us, but may not know what we do. Champify helps B2B go-to-market teams track customer movement. So as some of their best advocates are moving from one customer to another prospect or from one customer to another customer, all of the Salesforce operations, routing, alerting to make sure that you can run designated plays. And then also help finding new execs at target accounts, which aligns very nicely to what we're going to talk about. And I wanted to just highlight one mutual customer between Champify and Salesloft called Quantum Metric, a very enterprise-focused, bigger deal driven sales organization that is having a lot of success with Champify's intelligence coupled with Salesloft from both a cadence and rhythm perspective. So this is an organization that has created 80 opportunities, closed 7 figures in ARR, and is seeing a significantly higher win rate when engaging this kind of advocate first executive focused strategy. So if people want to learn more, there's a demo button in the top right. Otherwise, David, I'm excited to have you here. I appreciate you taking some time at a busy end of Q3. I'm sure you're counting down the days and the deals left, but why I'm excited to have you here, David, is, not only do you have a decade plus of great experience leading sales organizations and currently is the sales and BD leader at Salesloft, but your customers are some of the most innovative go-to-market teams. And I thought you would have a really great lens on this topic. So I'd love for you to just give a quick intro, maybe a background and role at Salesloft, and then we'll hop into it.
Yeah. And thanks for having me here, Todd. So I lead our sales and business development function here at Salesloft. What does that mean? It means that we're driving a good portion of the pipeline here at Salesloft. Our team is, I'd say, 95% focused on our enterprise and mid-market business units and really prospecting for those. And previously to Salesloft, I worked at another private equity-backed company called Bonterra Tech. And we sold into anywhere from a small nonprofit to the Fortune 100 and everything in between. But I've been in SaaS for, like you said, just over 10 years here.
Awesome. I want to break this session, David, really into two parts. The first, let's call it 10 or 15 minutes on breaking into accounts, right? So how do we actually get to power at the early stages, top of funnel? And then secondly, we'll move into what about accelerating deal velocity? What about increasing win rate? And how do we get to power throughout those deal cycles? So I wanted to start, obviously with breaking in. Do you have any frameworks or a philosophy for how you're engaging with execs in top prospect accounts today? And again, I know you're leading both sales and the BD function, so I'm sure you think a lot about this.
Yeah. So Mark Nemec, our CRO, when he started, he phrased things as, hey, when we're reaching out to executives aren't going to necessarily dedicate their time on anything that's not going to move the needle by 1%. So that means if you're a C-level at a billion-dollar company, you need to have a problem that's going to drive $10 million in revenue to that organization or fix $10 million. So I think that's really important to ground everyone on. And I think when reaching out to execs, but also anyone else when you're prospecting, it's really important to understand that no one cares about the products that you're selling them. And if you're not reaching out in a way that is trying to hook them with a challenge that they might be having or a really specific account hypothesis, then they're not going to respond. I think a lot of times when we're onboarding new employees at a company, there's a lot of product training, and that's helpful. You need to know about the product, but it's really important that you don't actually talk about the product at all when you're reaching out and doing prospecting. So I'd say that's kind of like high level. It's really important to remember when we're reaching out to prospects, but there's a couple frameworks that we use when we're doing personalization through email. So Samantha McKenna's, Show Me, You Know Me framework, where we're taking a really hyper-personalized approach, showing them, hey, that we did our research on that prospect, hooking them with that challenge. And then, we use problem-based cold calling. Very similar, we're trying to hook them with a challenge that they might be having. Hopefully that answers that question.
For sure. Two counterpoints to that. I think, first off, I agree. I think a lot of onboarding programs spend way too much time on the speeds and feeds of a product and not enough on here's the problems people are facing. Here's the impacts of those problems people are facing. How do you take some of the reps that may be more junior in their career or haven't sold a super strategic oriented product to figure out, hey, what are those big enough problems or opportunities that can hook the attention of an exec? Because I find there's certain sellers that have really high business IQ, right? And they understand the impact here and can craft those messages accordingly. How do you handle that for maybe reps more junior in their career or newer to the space?
Yeah. I mean, I think part of it's through properly enabling the team, but also getting them to understand the difference between a high-level problem and, what is a pain point. For instance, if we're reaching out with the hook that, forecasting is a problem, sure, forecasting is a problem, but we need to really dig into what that pain point is and get them to understand, hey, VPs of sales don't necessarily get fired for missing goal. They get they get fired for missing their forecast. And really illustrating, hey, here's the personas that we're reaching out to. Here are some of the specific pain points or hooks that we might have for them. So I think it's through regular enablement of the team and not necessarily enabling everything at once. And then getting them to understand what's going on with the prospect. So we do a couple things here at Salesloft. We've started to mix in doing persona fireside chats where we bring in, let's say, the CEO at Champify to do an Ask Me Anything session with our XDRs to get them to understand, like, hey, what are the things that are top of mind for them? What kind of prospecting do they actually respond to and engage with? So just overall education of the team.
I love that. You use two different specific words there that I think are really important, like forming a specific hypothesis and then what is that hook? And for a platform like Salesforce or Salesloft, there's a variety of different potential hooks, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then what I'm hearing is there's concrete trainings and playbooks that are really around showing what great looks like and kind of sharing that knowledge accordingly. How do you lean on some of the reps and show some of the good examples there to get that information permeated across the organization?
Yeah. So I probably use this rep maybe too often as an example, but John Alder is a enterprise development rep for Salesloft. He's in EMEA, and he's somebody that we lean on a lot in terms of what good looks like, but we also have him actively participate in, we do a cadence committee on a bi-weekly basis where we're talking about, hey, here's what we have in flight, here's what's going on. And we're also getting feedback from the frontline team on best practices that we should implement in some of these cadences and testing certain things. We're getting that team involved, and the frontline team involved when we're doing our bi-weekly enablement as a team. We're doing breakout rooms and, we're getting the team to collaborate and problem solve together. So I think part of it is giving opportunities to those that are maybe some of your top performers to give input. And then also, getting the global team together for regular enablement and not necessarily doing death by PowerPoint, but breakout sessions where we're collaborating and sharing best practices.
Love it. How do you think about, David, we're all pretty aware, I'd imagine, on this call on the tenure of a VP of sales, right? You can see maybe it's 15 months, maybe it's 18 months, right? But it's a short shelf life of these individuals. And most of them are coming in with 90-day plans. They have a couple months to really start making an impact. We see in our business, new CROs coming into the business or new enablement folks coming into the business. I'd imagine for you, that could be RevOps and a flurry of other roles. How do you think about kind of using some of that intelligence to go into the hook, to go into the hypothesis, or even as an input in, hey, this account might be more likely to engage with us? And how do you approach that across the organization?
Yeah. So first up, I think the 30, 60, 90-day thing is somewhat garbage. If you're an executive or if you're a VP and you're starting a new role, you're not being brought in because everything is amazing. You're being brought in because, hey, you need to drive improvements in efficiency and revenue. So that needs to be pretty quick, if not immediate. So I think a lot of times I've been at Salesloft for just under a year. I think that, within 9 months, Salesloft's probably determining, like, hey, am I doing a good job? If not, then they're probably looking at somebody else. So when I came into Salesloft, I know that I need to bring some best practices that I had and things that I utilize at other organizations and implement them here. So when you're doing account research on an organization, if you're utilizing, prospecting of, hey, who has departed the organization? That's really important. There's probably an event that was triggered in terms of their departure, but also who's coming into that organization. So that could be a champion that utilized your software in the past, but it also could just be somebody, hey, I need to make a quick impact. And maybe there's something in terms of the product that we're selling that can help them make that impact quickly.
Yeah, I wanted to give an example of a play that we're running. I agree with that, David. Like, it's not so much, hey, there's some new exec. It's something happens there that's driving that exec movement, either in or out, that could indicate that, hey, the strategic change is coming. There could be an opportunity, right? Even just to engage. An example hook that I wanted to share that's working for us now, and right, we're a much smaller company with a lot less brand awareness than Salesloft, but we spend a lot of time with our customer when we're going into an account. Same thing, very hypothesis driven around something specific that we believe we can help with. Ideally, the company is public and you can get some information on that, right? And then we spend time kind of finding that getting a little bit lower in the organization allows us to have conversations, right? And help craft that POV or help craft that point of view or hypothesis, and then using some of that information to get more senior. Ideally, within that account, there's former buyers, there's some new exec change, but that allows us to kind of craft that. You work with a lot of your Salesloft customers, I imagine, post-sale.
Yeah.
Where do you think people go wrong here? You alluded to, hey, too much focus on product specific speeds and feeds and not understanding what could be a strategic priority or something big enough for an exec to care. Where do you think organizations go wrong here when it turns to being able to get the attention of power?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's a lot of different ways, but I think one of the big ways is, yeah, when we're prospecting, we're not necessarily just targeting one specific contact or one specific persona, right? And we are going after the executives sometimes. But when we're going after the executives, we need to make sure that we are going after that with messaging and information from frontline managers, directors, and that's informing our hypothesis when we're targeting those executives. A lot of times, if you get the attention of an exec, yeah, they can say like, hey, director of sales, I want to make sure that you evaluate the software, something like that. But they're typically going to purchase a tool if their team underneath them is coming up to them and saying like, hey, this is a specific problem. So you really need to build champions within that organization to be going up at that next level while you're targeting that next level. So I think that's a big mistake where you're going after either just maybe the lower level, the mid level, or you're just going after the executives. It's not one or the other. You need to make sure you're doing both. And when you're going after executives, you need to make sure you're really going at it with a comprehensive point of view on what's happening within the organization. A big focus has been, I think, over the past 6 months or so, on crafting like compelling POVs that we can share at that executive level. And you're constantly updating that POV you have on that account based on new information that you're getting. So I think that's, one area in place where people go wrong.
It gets a really powerful nugget there. People think like, hey, I craft this POV. It's a constantly evolving, hypothesis, right? Every conversation, every piece of news. And for people that aren't aware, when David's saying POV, that means, a point of view. Basically, why could we potentially help this account? One thing you also said, David, about, we're not just engaging low, we're not just engaging high, we're approaching this account in a multifaceted way. Do you have any best practices or rules of engagement? Hey, when you're going to engage an account, this is who we expect you to engage there. Like, how much guidance or diligence do you give the reps there to know what good looks like?
Yeah, so we do give them, a good level of guidance, but also good level of flexibility in terms of who they target. So when we are going outbound, we're typically going outbound in a number of different ways. So we're targeting specific personas, but we also might be going after them based on reactive triggers, like someone changes a job, close lost, etc. We set the expectation that from the get-go, 3 to 5 contacts and a variety of different personas you should be targeting. Then you're taking that information that you got or didn't get from those 3 to 5 contacts, and then you're reattacking the account from a different angle. So I think that's important when we're attacking an account, but also on accounts where you're really seeing a lot of intent, like let's say the job change, close lost, demand intent. You need to be targeting that account in a collaborative way. So we made some shifts in terms of how we compensate our team to align to more of a territory target rather than a, hey, AE, you have this prospecting target, BDR, you have this prospecting target. In an ideal world, I'm getting an intent trigger. I'm reaching out to my AE. We're putting together a game plan of, hey, you're going to go after these couple contacts. I'm going after these. We're going to regroup, and then we're going to reattack that account. So collaborative prospecting in your enterprise and your mid-market accounts is super critical for, going after some of those larger organizations.
Love it. Before we switch gears to kind of what happens now we're broken into this account, I wanted to give a quick summary of what I meant when I said kind of starting low and working our way up. We're running a competitive campaign right now. And, David, you're a VP, you get hit up all day long. I'm a CEO, I get tons of cold outreach, most of it garbage, right? But the volume is high, right? What we find, for instance, we're running a competitive takeout campaign right now. We can find that it's relatively easy to get a handful of end users to give you some intel. Hey, we're using X product, we really don't like it, or hey, this thing hasn't been set up right, or X person's pushing it down on us, but no one's really using it. That's an example of some of the things we learn to morph our point of view to be able to go get to someone in power. So I think a couple of things I heard from you, David, that are awesome and a great summary would be, a lot of detail and rigor around specific hypothesis or hook that's big enough to get someone to care. And I think that 1% analogy is interesting, right? Like an exec can only make so many decisions or make so many bets, and it has to be potentially big enough to explore. And then I think the second part is a lot of enablement is required to teach someone what a good point of view looks like and realize that this is always evolving and morphing as you're constantly trying to approach or attack these accounts. I want to switch gears, David, to, okay, you did all the strategies you mentioned. You had show me, you know me email. You maybe got different triggers, proactive or reactive, to break into an account. Okay, now you're cutting your teeth in a deal. You're having some demos. You're having some discovery calls. What are you seeing success with Salesloft when it comes to where you're breaking in and then how you're navigating to power? Like, are you typically starting higher up and getting pushed down to people that are, the execs are delegating to take a look, or is it working vice versa? And how do you approach it?
Yeah. So I think in terms of attacking an account, at least from like the sales development and AE function, when we are collaboratively attacking an account, we typically are trying to have XDRs, BDRs go after the below the line, and our AEs are going after, above the line. Let's say that line is directors. So we're both going at that at the same time. But to your point, I think you asked, like, hey, we have a deal in the pipeline now. What are we doing after that? So we made some pretty significant changes at the beginning of this year in terms of how we compensate our team. So I think a lot of sales development teams in the past were compensated just on meetings or just opportunities. And when I came into Salesloft, we were compensated on qualified opportunities. But a lot of times, what that means is, hey, I've created an opportunity for you. It's qualified. Great. I'm going to move on and I'm going to go do my thing and create another opportunity. The reality is, we need to build out meaty opportunities that are going to advance through the pipeline. So we assigned a secondary quota of stage 3 pipeline ARR. So that incentivizes the sales development team to work with their AE partner past that initial build out of that opportunity. So I build that opportunity for you, Todd, conversation is great. It should be, hey, Todd, sounds like we learned X, Y, and Z on this call. I'm going to go after this department over here, and I'm going to see if I can get some groundswell or gain some information that I can use on the next demonstration. So it's changing how we look at pipeline development. It needs to be done, throughout the deal, so that we build out that opportunity to be a bigger opportunity, but also gather more information that when we go up each level, it's a much better POV, and it's a much more compelling case of getting this approved by the executive level.
So to make sure I understand that, David, it went from count of qualified ops as, maybe accepted by the AE to maybe a level lower in the funnel of also quantity, right? To make sure it's like, hey, are we looking at this as the whole potential use case? Are we trying to get enough of that pie? And now the best SDRs are working closely with the AEs as some early calls are happening to making sure we're getting wide enough. The business case could potentially big enough. Am I understanding that correctly?
So actually, it went from qualified opportunities to qualified opportunities plus a level higher of, hey, what's that opportunity pipeline value now too?
Got it.
And is it advancing further along in the pipe?
What's the role of the you mentioned John in Europe, one of the best SDRs, that you're constantly sharing some of the learnings. What is someone like that doing after that first couple calls? Is he taking the first couple calls, or is the AE taking the calls and then the BDR is on there and learning some of the intel and they're making a plan? Like, how often are they syncing on this? Because it requires some finesse. And I think you have to be on the same page to do it well. So what have you seen there? What's working?
I mean, you're definitely having, a regular one-on-one with your AE where you're collaboratively talking about, account strategy. Yeah, John's, in some cases, he might take some initial calls on his own with maybe some lower level managers or some ICs to gather information. But I think it's taking a more like assertive approach to collaboration. I think, in some cases, XDRs look to their AEs to provide direction in terms of like how they prospect. At some organizations, some of these AEs might not have been prospecting for quite a while. And the fact that AEs and many organizations now have like self-sourced pipeline targets might be new to them. So we can't always just defer to what our AEs want us to focus on. We need to bring that expertise and point of view on the account and the hypothesis and who we should be targeting. So I think it's being more assertive in your approach to how you're going to build that pipeline and how you're going to build out that opportunity is key. But also, you need to be willing to test and try new things. I use John as an example, but a lot of times, or a couple of times, John's messaged me. He's like, "Hey, I'm trialing this software, and here's the learnings that I found out of this." Now, number one, John, I don't know how he's getting around the security checks because I can't do that, but he's bringing back all the information that he finds from that and trying to implement it as a part of it.
Interesting. Yeah, we do some for people on listening, you might be thinking, hey, this is a more mature organization. We do something very similar, David. So after the first meeting, most of the time our AEs are doing the first meeting, I would say 80, 90% of the time. But after that first meeting, they have a debrief and they say, okay, what's the plan now? Who's going to who? How are we getting wider? What did we learn in this call that's changing our point of view or perspective? Does the value prop that we want to tie to change after something that we've learned in this call? So very similar for us. I'll address Emily's question in the chat in a second, but there's one more I want to bring to you, David, which, a lot of people now can go and look at Salesloft and Champify and do tons of research on G2 and get in peer groups. And a lot of people think the role of the seller is changing more to buyer enablement, right? How do you arm your sellers, right? To be able to say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Champion, I can tell you're leaning into Salesloft. How do you arm them to be able to do some of the selling when they're not in the room? And how much time do you spend there from an enablement perspective?
Yeah, I think that it's more so, at the AE level, it's changing it into team selling. An organization I was at, one of our qualification criteria, like how we moved things through the pipe, was is the primary point of contact on the account an advocate for Salesloft or Champify? Because if they're not, then that primary point of contact is not going to help you advance things through the pipeline further. And you need to find a new primary point of contact to help you. So it's changing it to team selling, and also, a multi-threading approach, where you're targeting executives at that organization based on conversations that you had. And also, again, that point of view, arming that prospect with the point of view on that account and having them help you build that point of view so that they can take that point of view throughout their account. So a lot of times when we're putting together a POV, it's not necessarily just the AE or the BDR that's sharing that while they're prospecting. It's the point of contact that helped us get in the door there that's sharing it throughout the account.
100%. Maybe David, you want to address Emily's question in the chat, and then other folks, we have about 9 more minutes. If anyone wants to put any other questions in the chat, we'll address them as well.
Yeah, Emily, I think it's a good question. And one thing is, when we rolled out this new comp plan, I will be honest, like I don't think it was very popular with the XDR team, primarily because of this. They said, hey, it's out of the BDR's control. I would definitely push back on that. The reality is, how you're compensating your team, if they're generating opportunities in pipeline that aren't closing, then we're not paying for ourselves. And sales development is not necessarily like a privilege, or it's a privilege to have sales development resources. It's not a right. And if we're not paying for ourselves and generating that pipeline, then we're not going to have more resources devoted to sales development. So I would say that, hey, it is within the BDR's control to ensure that we're getting the right points of contact on that opportunity when we're creating that. It is within our control to ensure that we're pulling out a compelling pain point and showing them the implications and the need payoff of solving that. That is within our control. Now, yes, you're going to have AEs of varying skill levels, and I think that's something that you want to monitor. And it's also something that, hey, when there are instances of things coming up, you want to make sure that you're able to have a conversation with that AE or a conversation with the sales manager and dive deep into it and see where things went wrong. But I would say it's definitely partially within the BDR's control.
I agree with everything you just said, David. I'll give my take, Emily, is, on what accounts you're targeting, right? The BDR working closely with their AE does control that. And there's a lot of external factors you can see in terms of, hey, what could be the propensity to buy and what could be the potential spend at this account, and make sure they're guided in the right direction. So like David, we don't have a stage 3, pipeline dollar amount, but we do have specific kickers for above a certain employee count or above a certain deal size to make sure we're spending most of our time on what could be larger deals. I'll take Georgiana's next question around, Sarah's around in enterprise accounts, low, medium, exec level leads. I don't think there's any right way. And I think every company's value prop is different. We find our ideal situation for us breaking into an account is an exec is interested in what they're doing and they're telling one of their lieutenants to take a look. Obviously, it's hard to be able to get that to happen. Many times we have to start lower or middle and work our way up. I like to think about our approach as kind of middle out, right? You're starting with managers and directors, you're validating some of the pain points with ICs, and then you're working your way up to the exec. I don't think there's any right or wrong way. And then maybe, David, if you want to take these last two from Georgiana or Jonathan.
Yeah. Georgiana, what I would say is, I would say it probably depends on where we are in the deal cycle. If you're prospecting me and I tell you I'm going to forward this along to my manager, I'm not going to do that. And I guarantee if the prospect's saying that, they're not going to do that. If it's further along in the deal cycle, I think a question that you need to ask, like, hey, if you had a discovery call, you've done a demonstration, are you an advocate for Salesloft? Very simple yes or no question. And if they can't say conclusively yes, they're not bringing it up. And or they're not going to be successful when they're bringing it up. So I say give them the opportunity to confirm that. But yeah, you need to multi-thread and you need to, go after other points of contact within the organization. I just had a demonstration of a tool earlier today. I definitely told the AE I was an advocate for the tool. And what I said to them is like, hey, if you plan on multi-threading our account within the next 8 days and going after Mark, bad timing. Don't do that because it's the end of our quarter. So hopefully that answers that question. And Jonathan, when, if any, is there a time of too many people in the kitchen when it comes to a sale? Yeah, I think that I forgot one of the VPs of sales was talking about a specific deal where the AE had asked a number of our C-suite to be in this big meeting, and they realized at a certain point, like, hey, there's too many people and too many resources, and hey, the prospect might get intimidated that they're bringing in the big guns and might feel overwhelmed, and there's a shift in the balance of power of that call. I think, it needs to be even in terms of the balance of power there.
Dave, you said two things in the last couple of minutes that I want to double down on. Sounds like a really simple question of, hey, are you an advocate of this? Are you a supporter? And I think so many times people don't ask the question. I'm guilty of this myself, still being on sales calls. And you really don't know until you ask that directly. And then what we try to train our reps on are, okay, be able to get that verbal yes or no. If it's not an outstanding yes, the answer is no, like you said, David, and I agree with that. Yeah. And then the question comes, hey, here's the 3 questions your boss is likely going to ask you. Right? Have we tried to look at this with other people? Have we tried to look at this of what we've done in-house? Why can't we solve this with X, Y, Z? Whatever those questions are, being able to start to arm that advocate, get them on the same side of the table with you to have these conversations. And then I'll take Renee's question. I can speak for Champify. We have SDRs, and they make up about 25% of our revenue. So it's an effective motion for us. And it's also makes up a bigger percentage of our pipeline. And our hypothesis is over time, some of these initial opportunities that are closed lost to do nothing will get closed in the future. So I think over time, it'll make up a slightly larger chunk. I'm curious what it is for you, David.
Yeah. So Renee, I lead sales development here at Salesloft. So yeah, I would say it's probably around the same lines, Todd, of 20 to 30% in terms of the revenue that is brought in on new logos as well.
Awesome.
Oh, you go.
David, last thing I have for you. First off, huge thank you. We're at time. I appreciate everyone participating in the chat, and hopefully this is useful. I took away some nuggets myself for some things we need to be thinking about. Even for the people that have been doing this very long, this stuff is hard. It's harder than it's ever been. And I think we're all trying to figure out exactly how to do this in the new world we're living in. David, thank you for the tactical tips. Anything you leave people on, one thing you're super vocal or repetitive with your team as you try to close out this quarter or build enough pipeline heading into Q4?
Yeah. I would say no one cares about your products. And if you can't come up with the answer of why and how they could use the tool that you're selling, then you shouldn't be sending them anything.
Yeah, ours, I'll just answer my own question, is pretty similar. It's just that, is this big enough to get important people in this account to care, right? And if you're not confident about that answer, spend time somewhere else, right? And I think the second thing is, simply put, is this person an advocate? You need someone in there really fighting to create change. A lot of us are selling things that are not budgeted or are off cycle, and you have to have that change maker. So, David, tons of nuggets of gold here. I can tell you've thought long and deep about a lot of these topics, and it's awesome to see that you're having a great quarter on the XDR front, and wishing you a lot of luck over the next 7 to 8 days. For people that maybe had to drop off early, we'll share this recording with everyone. And there's a get demo button at the top of the screen for anyone that wants to learn more, or just strategize on pipeline, what's working, etc. So appreciate everyone taking time, finish up Q3. Good luck for the rest of Q4. Thanks again, David.
Thanks.
All right, take care.